Just ask for more money. How do you become a 6 and 7 figure earner? Just ask for more money. I don't know if I can curse or not. Well, that's great, but I'd rather lose a deal because they weren't the right client than lose a deal because we didn't perform.
Welcome to another episode of the Big Picture Business Podcast. So happy that you are here with us today. We have an amazing guest. I'm so excited to introduce all of you to Mike Ficara. Hi, Mike.
Hi, how are you?
Man, we're doing good. We're excited to chat with you. That's for sure.
Yep, this will be fun if it hasn't been already, right?
I had the honor of being on Mike's show. And so within like 10 minutes of talking to him on his show, I knew we got to get him on this show because we have a lot of really cool similarities when it comes to our outlook on business and what it means to be a leader and all that. So we're going to get into it. Mike is a seasoned entrepreneur and consultant. His core focus is on growth and scaling strategies for clients. He has taken existing businesses and allowed them to see massive growth and consulted small and large companies such as NEC, Nestle, Brand Ethos, and Top Score Writing, among others. Mike is also the author of one of my new all-time favorite books, Like Socks on a Rooster. Okay, it's a guide to busting the entrepreneurial cliches that are holding you back. I'm obsessed with this book. I've been telling my friends, my clients, my family members, like this book is gold and it's super easy to digest. There's just so much value in here. So hi. Thanks for being here.
All right, that's it, guys. Well, this has been fun. I appreciate that because I don't think it's going to get any better than that. That was awesome.
I want to know more about the book because I haven't read it. So we're going to dive into that. How did you get started in business? What was your journey like to get here?
You know, I'm an 80s baby. That used to make me young, but I guess not anymore. You know, I mean, as I'm pushing 40 or I pushed into 40 a little bit now. It was such a unique time. And you know, we were talking about movies a little earlier. I just saw this one called 8-Bit Christmas where Neil Patrick Harris is telling his daughter about getting a Nintendo, right? And if you guys remember, like that was the first kind of glimpse into technology as an 80s baby. And, you know, ever since then, I was really fascinated with technology and business, right? They were always the two things that really kind of I was always drawn to. But unfortunately, and you know, as I talk about in the book, I was not the world's best student, right? So when you weren't a good student in the 80s, there was no Gary V's, there was no Jesse Itzler's, there was none of these guys who say, hey, you can entrepreneur, you can hustle. There was no role models, right? You saw there was successful people and there was unsuccessful people. And that's what we were taught. And that's how you were raised. So I kid around about the book. It's written at a first grade level because I did first grade twice. So the book is an easy read from that level, but I really wasn't good in school. And all the way up, even through high school, you know, I saw my friends go away to great colleges. I went to community college and it was just always like, unless you got good grades in school, you weren't going to be successful. But I always loved working, right? So I still went to school. And even to this day, a lot of people have said to me, hey, we didn't know you weren't good at school. Like we never knew. I'm like, yeah, because I was just like, I accepted it as who I was. And I just had fun at school. You know, I didn't complain about it or whine or, you know, boast about my grades or not boast about my grades. So I went to community college, didn't know what I wanted to do, kind of took about a year and a half, almost 2 years off, and was waiting tables, which I think is the best job you could ever have because you learn so much from waiting tables. And I had one of my old teachers come in from the high school I went to, and he said, hey, do you want to come in and substitute teach? And I was like, well, that sounds like an easy job. Of course I want to do that. So I did it. I was about 22 at the time, and I just fell in love with teaching. I fell in love with education, ended up, you know, going back to school, finishing, getting my degree in psychology. I taught psychology and theology for the better part of a decade. And going back to that technology thing, I love technology. So this is in the early 2000s. It's so funny because it shows up in my time hop. Like I was using Twitter. I had a podcast. I was doing all these things that I really believe would change the classroom. And that led me to get a job at an educational startup unknowingly. I got my master's, ironically enough. And when I went to work for that startup, not knowing it was a startup, it was just, that was the bug that sort of bit me. And then I spent really the second half of my career, and we could talk about a little bit more in detail, in the entrepreneurial space. You know, started off with just educational companies, but the concepts and philosophies in the educational companies and things I learned as a teacher really applied to multiple businesses. So I've worked in, as you said earlier, a variety of different industries, and I've never had to decide what I want to be when I grow up, which has been a really cool thing. So
that's awesome.
That's the short version.
Then how are you helping other entrepreneurs in their businesses these days?
I think the one thing is there is a lot of content and information out there, right? So I think you know, one thing I've learned is that it's kind of like a buffet, right? Like if you put everything on your plate, it's going to be disgusting. But if you pick the right things, you can have a really good meal. And then if you're still hungry, you go back and get more. I think there's 3 areas though that I've noticed in business that most small businesses, and even honestly some large companies, they either are functioning really well in one or some of these areas, but they're never firing on 3. And that's really marketing, sales, and implementation. Those are the three key areas that I don't care if you're selling hot dogs or you're selling Hot Wheels, that's what's going to make your business be successful. And a lot of times, some people are really great at marketing. They could get leads in, they could get people to buy their product. They have great salesmen, but they don't know how to deliver on that product, right? And then you got people that are just great at customer service and implementation, but have no idea how to market or do sales or anything like that. So what we do is we come in and we look at a business and say, okay, well, where are you firing on those areas? Either well, or where do you need help? Or sometimes it's just, especially in early entrepreneur or solo entrepreneurs, they're carrying all that weight on their back. What can we take off your back and help you grow? So that's really the key areas we focus in helping businesses grow. And we find when we step in with that, sometimes it's consultative, it's a very short term, and sometimes it's a long-term relationship. But that's really where we like to focus and make sure everything's sort of gelling and moving together.
Cool. So let's talk about those three aspects then and start with marketing. Where do you see people failing the most around marketing?
The biggest thing is I think they're doing too much or too little. So most people are either all in and they're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Pinterest and email blasts and this and that, and they're being as many places as they can. But a lot of times they're spreading themselves so thin, they don't even know who their core audience is, right? So it becomes, I call it sometimes like bus stop advertising. Sure, you're putting it up there, but you got no idea who's driving by or what they're doing. Sometimes the latter is usually true, that they're doing nothing at all, but we just don't have time for marketing, right? We don't have time I can't manage Facebook. We posted something, last year, and we just hope that people see it. So we try to come somewhere in the middle. I do believe in being present on multiple platforms. I think you just have to do it, but we identify, hey, what's best for you? Where are you going to find, your target audience? Where are you going to generate the most leads? Is it email? Is it social media? Is it podcasting? Is it a mix of both? And sometimes it is doing more, right? Sometimes people are doing really well on, Facebook, and then we got to expand out to Instagram and Twitter. But usually it's the latter, right? They're spread either too thin over too many platforms or not enough. So we try to say, hey, where can we put our efforts that we can really get the most out of our marketing efforts and the most out of what we're doing?
It's interesting the way that you're talking about, like, it's important that you got to be on multiple platforms, because my approach is like, maybe pick one or two that like you really want to be on. But what you're saying, like, yes, it is so important, especially for brand cohesiveness and consistency, to make sure that you're keeping things going across the board. With your clients, do you encourage them to have like an automated service to some degree where they're not having to go on every single platform? Or do you encourage them to do it individually? What's the approach there?
I think it depends on what you're doing, right? I think the bigger you are, probably the more automated you should be. If you're, using things like Sendable or Hootsuite or whatever it is to automate your posts and get them out there. Smaller local companies, I like the idea of engaging a lot more on the content and really doing a little more organically. I mean, look, the tools are out there to save you time. So I think that's the first thing you have to look at, right? Like, especially when they're looking to hire us, like we take that over. So we look at it and say, okay, do we need to be, yes, we could use these platforms to put content out, but the cross engagement and the engagement with your audience is so important, right? Because it's like, I go back to that bus stop advertising, right? You could be sort of just there, or you could be talking to the people at the bus stop, right? You could be engaging with them, you could be interacting, you could be doing those things. I always go back to real estate because I think they've been doing a lot of this stuff forever, right? It's relationship-based marketing. Just putting the post up isn't good enough, right? It's sometimes about developing the relationship. So the automation, I think a lot of times depends on the industry that you're in and what your goal is. If it's mass awareness, sometimes that's hard. Sometimes you just got to be, hey, we got to get it out there. We got to do that. But products that really win are the ones that engage with their audience, right? And most people, they don't want to follow products to buy. And we know this in marketing, it's a basic concept, right? They don't want to follow products to buy. They want to follow products to be a fan, right? Like, people drink Coca-Cola not because of good advertising, right? People that like drink Coca-Cola because they're a fan of Coca-Cola, right? They got the Coca-Cola doll. Like, I remember I had a professor in college. The first time I failed out, I did marketing, but she had like Coca-Cola stuff everywhere, right? Like, it's like a brand that you identify with. And I think that's what we try to do, is build more of a fan base than a customer base. Then they'll buy, right? Because then when you ask, it's like, oh yeah, it's because I'm a fan that I want to buy. So it really depends on the business, but I think the automation tools are there if you need the time, right? But I think at the end of the day, organic engagement and you talking to your audience, especially as the business leader, that wins every single time. That's a tough nut to crack sometimes with, with some CEOs, because they're not used to that, right? Or they're too used to it. Sometimes that's the other thing, but it's just these extremes in social media right now are a riot.
That's for sure. Rory, I see you smiling. I know what you're going to say.
Oh, what am I going to say?
Well, I'm sure it has to do with building relationships. So
yeah. One of our common themes we talk about is relationships, not transactionships. And that's exactly what you're speaking to, is like, you've got to build the relationship with your audience. They will purchase if they know, like, and trust you, and they respect you. And if you can tap into each of those aspects and continue to build that relationship, then your business is going to grow. If you focus on transactions, what ends up happening? You make that transaction and you have no follow-up sales.
Yeah.
Good luck with with anything reoccurring. And we know this, right? That people follow people, not necessarily the business, especially on social media. To your point, Mike, of you saying like that organic engagement, people thrive on that. I know that if I comment on a brand's post and they take the time to comment back to me, it makes me think about them more. When I'm in the store next time, I see the product or whatever, of course, because I have a personal, even though it was probably someone way down the line in the business, I don't know that, right? It still is, it creates that brand trust. I think that's important.
And we make marketing so complex, right? It sounds like such a fancy word, marketing and targets and customer avatar and all this. It's really, like you guys said, it's just relationships, right? So it's the same thing that you do in real life, right? Like if you want to be friends with someone, where are you going to go? You're going to go where people have the same interest you do. Like that's marketing, right? Like if you like Italian food, you're going to go to an Italian restaurant. Odds are you're going to hit off with people. If you don't like Italian food and you go there, odds are you're not going to hit off with the staff. You're not going to have a good experience. So when you're marketing your business, I always tell you, like, go where your people, right? Like find your people, like as if you were socializing, you're out in your neighborhood or you're doing these things. It's like, even with my kids, like why am I close to the parents of my kids, right? Because we have something in common, right? Like you have that interest, you have that bond. That's all marketing is finding a common interest and then growing together, right? That's what you want to do. It's not that complex, but we make it sometimes seem like, well, what is it? And that's why I crack up every time I hear the algorithm. Oh, the algorithm's changing. It's like, no, it's not. It's like, that's why I say, no, I can't be friends with you anymore because the algorithm changed in real life. It's not, sorry, Bob, we can't be friends anymore. The algorithm's changed. If we still like football and we still like drinking beer together and we still like eating food and going to a ball game, we could still be friends. And I think marketing is that same way. We get hung up on too much of the complexity that's there. It's so basic, really.
Well, and you've got a lot of people who are teaching it to be complex because then it keeps their audience in their world and never actually evolving and like building their own businesses. They're just constantly in a learning phase, right?
Yep. I'm a consultant. There's a lot of money in confusion, guys.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. And at the end of the day, what I tell all of my clients is to keep it simple. I mean, that's the secret sauce to everything. Just keep it simple. I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel here. Just go back to basics and keep it simple.
So what about sales? Like, what is the area where you see people falling down on their sales?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and marketing comes first, right? And I think if you build those relationships, and like I said, if we go back to it, like if Bob and I have the same interest, or if you want to look at it as a dating relationship, if you have a common interest with somebody, but you never say, hey, come over to my house and hey, Bob, you like watching the Dolphins? Come over to my house and watch a game, or let's go to a game together. If you never ask, that relationship's not going to flourish, right? Like we go back to the marketing. So if we have the common interest, we're in the same spaces, we've attracted each other. I think a lot of times in sales, there's two things. There's not the ask, but then if it's really awkward and it's like, hey, Bob, like I saw that you really like the Dolphins. Like I love the Dolphins too. Like how about I come over to your house, Bob, and we watch the Dolphins together, and you can give me a steak and we can sit in your bed and cuddle and watch the game. Like they either go like way too light or way too creepy, right? So I think when it comes to sales, I think the biggest thing is stop selling, right? Like that's the first thing, is stop being too aggressive, stop being too, salesy. The thing I love about being in the education space, and I've written a few articles on this and I talk about it in the book, is teachers make the best salespeople. And the reason why they do is two reasons. Number one, they're big on relationships usually, right? Which we've talked about a lot, previously. Any teacher usually cares about their students and they're really engaged, a good teacher. And when they get into the sales space, it's the same way, right? They really care about the customer. They care about what they're doing. I don't care if they're selling an educational product or something else. I've seen plenty of teachers move into the real estate space and become massively successful because they actually care. And the other thing is they don't sell, they teach. They don't sell, they teach. I've been doing I know this is coming out a little later, but doing the Christmas shopping this year, right? Like, it's like, do you really need someone to help you buy certain things? I could go online, read reviews. You can become very educated as a consumer. If I'm looking for a salesperson, the odds are I need help. And that's why I'm there, because I don't know something. And I kidded around before and said it, but it's true. There's money to be made in confusion. And a lot of times people need a salesperson, not because they need to be sold to, but because they need help understanding something. So the first thing we do when we come into the sales process is look, how can we cultivate a relationship we already have, teach them why they need this product, or why they need the service, or why they need the software. And that's in B2C and B2B. It's like two football players, wanting to go to each other's house to watch a football game. That's way different than two fans, right? Like, well, I know the game. I know what you're doing. I know what you're saying. I think it's really, in B2B sales, it's much more about that teaching education. How can we help you make more money? How can we relieve a problem you're having? So it's a different thing. Whereas B2C, I think it's still the same thing. It's just educating people more than selling to them. So I think the first rule in sales is just stop selling.
It's like you're preaching to the choir here.
Yes. Our people, amen.
I knew. I was like, oh, he's got to come on our show, because what you're talking about, it totally aligns with our philosophies as well.
It's always worked that way, right? Like, I don't think it's new. I think it's always been that way. And you even see it from a lot of the veteran sales guys that they say that, aggressive sales and pressure sales works once, but I don't want one customer. I want a reoccurring customer.
Yeah. And, I always used to think there was something wrong with me because I didn't sell aggressively. And I was like, oh, all these people, they're like saying you have to do this and you have to have all this like perfect language and all that. But I was like, but that never works for me. Like, I just have a conversation and people ask me questions. I answer it honestly. And then they want to work with me. And I'm like, why aren't more people doing that? It's
a much more laid back approach. And I think in large part, that's why you have such an abundance of students, Rory, and clients because of that reason. Because you're not aggressive. You're like, here it is, want it or not. And they all want it. So it works out. And I know, Rory, your approach as well, and you've taught me this, is to really just sell ahead of time before you even get on a call.
Position ahead of time. Yeah.
Position. That's what I mean. Thank you. Yeah. Not sell, but position yourself in a way where it sells itself.
Yeah. And then have an offer so good that no matter how good your selling is, the offer does the selling for you. If you can do those things, position yourself properly in the first place, and then have an offer that people are just like, I have to have this at whatever the cost, and you don't have to push hard. When people are trying to sell a crappy offer, Mike, you probably see this as well. When the offer is so bad, they're sitting there and they're like, why can't I get anyone to buy this? That's part of the issue, is that like no one wants it. So you got to make it better.
Yeah. And there's usually two reasons there, right? You know the offer sucks, but you're selling it anyway, right? So that's usually reason number one. Or number two, I think a lot of times people are, listen, let's be honest, like, you need money, right? So I think it's hard. You have to sometimes disconnect that portion of your brain of like, I think a lot of people do two things. One of two things is sometimes we need money, right? A lot of times too, especially if you're new in entrepreneurship or you want this to be your side hustle, maybe you set a dollar goal, or you're broke, right? They're so desperate to sell. If you could turn that off, you could be a much better salesperson. And then you have the other person that, not that they don't need the money, but they're spending the money before they get it. So it's like, man, if I close this deal, we're going to Tijuana. I think if you turn that, like, what you're going to do with the money mindset off, almost just not even worry about the amount of money coming in and worry about the deal itself, you'll be much more successable. I think it's what you're speaking to. It's that desperation I think sometimes people have of they get so focused on the dollar amount associated with the deal as opposed to just closing the deal. Like a $1,000 deal and a $10,000 deal you should have the same amount of energy about both, right? Like they should excite you just the same. And also you should be able to ignore them just the same, in my opinion. I think sometimes that dollar amount can really get in your head, man.
Really good advice. I love that you just said you should be able to ignore them just the same as well. Interesting. I have a hard time with that. I'm still learning.
Yeah. It's not easy, but that's why like these guys, and you get it, like that are super wealthy. It does. The numbers just become a game to them, right? And I even had a call we were on, and I was on with my partner, and hope they're not listening. But like we were gonna pitch him at a certain price, and I was listening, and then I was like, I sent her a text message around the call. I said, listen, and I asked for significantly more than we were going to for two reasons. Number one, I think it was justified, and number two, what the hell, like
why not?
and the deal grew a little bit. There was a justification for the price, but it wasn't about the dollar amount. It was about like, I knew if we got that and we asked for it, we would be able to do a good job for them. But I wasn't focused on the dollar amount. I knew we were undervaluing ourselves. I think that's important too, right? You have to know your value, right? And you have to know that when you're asking, you have to be confident in the number. I think if I asked for the lower number, I would have been nervous I was going to stretch my team too thin, right? And I think that's the other thing. And Rory, I'm sure you're going to ask this next. Well, what about implementation? There's a lot of people out there coaching. Just ask for more money. How do you become a 6 and 7 figure earner? Just ask for more money. Well, I don't know if I can curse or not. Well, that's great. But if you got to understand too, if you ask for more money, people are going to expect more from you. Where I did speak about that disconnection in the sale itself, I think in implementation, you have to be very aware that I don't care whether it's a big company that does $60 million a year or a small company that does $6,000 a year. If they're paying you a amount of money, it means something to them, right? And they're going to want to see a result. I think the problem I see a lot with implementation is people overpromise and underdeliver, or my famous saying is they overdeliver in the areas you don't really care about, right? So it's like, hey, I got this service from you, whether it's marketing or something like that, and I hired you to do an email campaign for me, and you're sitting here showing me this amazing Facebook campaign you put together. Well, I hired you to do an email campaign for me, not a Facebook campaign. Why am I excited? Yeah, but look at how great this is. Well, I don't care.
Right.
Like, I think when it comes to implementation, you really have to deliver on what your client needs. And I think if the marketing and the sale is done right, when it comes to delivering that, it won't be there. I can't tell you how many sales guys I've heard say to me, well, that's, our job is just to get the deal, and then we throw it over the fence and it's their problem. And that is a scary, scary business model, because what's going to happen is people aren't going to be happy. I'd rather lose a deal because they weren't the right client than lose a deal because we didn't perform. And that, I think, every day is what will make you a successful business, is if you live up to your word, and you live up, especially in the marketing space. I mean, this is such a dirty business, and it's such a space where you guys have said it. Like, there's people out there just creating fear and confusion and, algorithms and this and that. Not that stuff doesn't exist. Don't get me wrong. It's a very complex industry when you start running ads and doing certain things like that. But on the same hand, you really have to be honest in what you think you could deliver. There's no one out there that can say, well, we have a system that's going to guarantee you 1,000 leads. It's not true, right? Like, it's like, we're going to try to find your target audience and we'll do our best. I think just that over promising and not being able to deliver is a very, very dangerous thing for a lot of businesses. And like I said, in charging your worth, because I think a lot of companies too sometimes undercharge to get the client, and then they can't deliver because they didn't charge enough, where if you did, you would have been able to do what you promised them. So like I said, I know it's a lot of like extremes, but I think that's what makes the people in this industry successful versus not, is they find that balance, and we try to help them find that balance. That's really my goal, is to help get businesses that really want to do the right thing to that point.
In our starting a business episode, I even mentioned that overcharging can be a downside as well, because what ends up happening is, like you're saying, a lot of people are in the undercharging category, but then there's the overcharging category where you price yourself out of the market because you haven't created enough justification for the price point that you're asking. And like you were saying, you had justification for asking for that price. Let's say you didn't have that justification, you just asked for that price. Well, what ends up happening? One of two things. They're upset that they paid so much and didn't feel like they got the value out of it, or you don't get the deal because they don't see the value in the first place.
It's funny when we look at, and I'm looking at the guitars behind you, right? Or even, we talked about the art on the wall behind me, or what you guys have. These things sometimes appreciate in value. It didn't cost any more or less to make them as they hang on our walls, right? But the thing of it is, the value and the appreciation for what they are becomes greater over time. And if you could do that with your product, that's when you could charge more. It doesn't take you much longer to create the post or do the things, but if you could create value and appreciation for what you do with your clients, then you can ask for more money. Then you can ask for a higher ticket item. But if you come out the gate just because, that's a scary, to your point, Rory, that is a scary place to go, man.
Yeah. And that's why, like, my whole business is helping people position themselves. We do like book development, right? And becoming a best-selling author and getting featured in the media and stuff like that. When you do all that stuff, that's all the stuff before you actually get on a call with someone. And if you've done that right, that call is so different. There's a shift that happens. When you don't have it, you're like every sales trick in the book to try and make the sale. When you have it, you get on the call, it's like, oh, we're just having a conversation. And if it's right fit to work together, let's work together.
Brings up a situation that happened recently. So I was out in Las Vegas for a convention, and there was a guy out there. I'd met him a couple of times before, and we had met again, and then we were talking at the convention, and then he's like, he goes, all right, well, I'll be out in Vegas. I think he said he'll be out in Vegas, and I was there in November, right? So I was like, okay, cool. So we went back out and we had a second meeting in Vegas with him. First time I saw him, first time we met, we had a good rapport. Second time I saw him at the convention, it was like, okay, when I saw him this time in Vegas for that third meeting, my book had come out in between our meetings, and he had read the book on the flight over. He comes running into the restaurant for our dinner meeting like, Mike, I'm so excited to see you. I read the book. He knew things about there. And I had no clue. I didn't send him the book before. He just ordered it on his own and he read it. And to your point, it changed the dynamic, because like, as I was talking about things, I had credibility now, right? He's like, oh yeah. I remember you said that in your book. So it is, to your point, Rory, it really is amazing how much that stuff can work for you. And like, I didn't even do anything, right? I didn't even tell him to read the book. I didn't send it to him. And then we were able to have a real conversation, but he knew I wasn't kind of like trying to pull the wool over his head, right? It was kind of like instant credibility. So it was a trip, man. It was hilarious.
I'm so glad that you had that experience. I too have had many of those experiences to this day. So my book launched 3 years ago now. I think just shy of 3 years.
2.5.
Yeah, 2.5. I guess in July it'll be 3 years. Yeah. I will overnight my book to people who schedule on my calendar. so they have something tangible ahead of time. And every single person that has ever held my book that I overnighted it to became a client, 100% close rate, because it was just this, I didn't have to do that, but I did. And whether they read it or not, they have it. A book is, I say this all the time. I'm sure our listeners are getting sick of it, but seriously, a book is like one of the best tools ever to not only like, okay, here's the credibility, but it has your voice and everything that you want to share. And so it almost becomes, like you said, to the gentleman that was talking to you, he knew what was in the book already. And so the conversation was already kind of started, and it helps just launch into the next level. It's a win-win all around.
Yeah, no, it was a great, neat experience, really neat experience, you know, so.
Well, I want to know more about your book. What do you talk about in the book? What are the main takeaways that people are going to get?
It's funny because it's something I've wanted to do for a while. So I always tell everybody, it's one of those things where I knew I wanted to sort of give this advice and tell the journey. Because like I said, I've been through some things from early on when I started, in that first business venture. There were things that were promised to me that I didn't get, and, stock options and equity. And, more importantly, just as you grow, right, you learn more, you go through these experiences. So I really wanted to tell that story because I think a book is a way to allow people to learn from your mistakes a little bit. So the book talks about, kind of those entrepreneurial things that we hear a lot of the cliches: grind it out, work hard, your network is your network. Yes, all those things make sense, but what's the actions behind them? What's the actions behind making those things happen? So it's a little bit of that kind of told through portions of my story, as well as the three things we talk about: the idea of marketing, sales, and implementation. How do you do those things properly? What are some of the key pillars that need to be done in those areas? And more importantly, not how to kind of become a victim of entrepreneurship, how to become a success story of entrepreneurship. There's no gateway for entry in entrepreneurship, but the exit could be it's either very painful or it's very profitable. So it's up to you on how you do that. So the book's kind of written in that vein. And the title hails from, my father, who I talk about a lot in the book, who's been a great mentor of mine. I learned a lot from him in life and in my entrepreneurial career. When we were kids and we used to like move furniture around in the house, or we used to do something really difficult, every time we got the furniture just where it needed to be, he used to say, "Oh, like socks on a rooster." So my dad being my hero, I always thought that was just something people said. So as I went to college and started teaching and got my first job, was in front of more and more people, I would say it. Eventually people started saying, "What the hell does that mean? Like why are you saying that? Like, that doesn't make any sense." And it was something that I knew, that I understood, but people didn't know what it meant, or they knew it in a different meaning maybe. So I titled the book that, because it's really important that you understand not what you're saying, but why you're saying it. Instead of like, hey, the Entrepreneur Guide to Success or something cheesy like that. It's a great title because people are like, "Well, what does that mean?" It's just a great conversation. So I hope there's not a book someone has called The Entrepreneurial Guide to Success.
There probably is.
Literally, mine is The Business Owner's Guide.
Well,
Guide to leadership and success. So, whatever, no big deal.
Sorry. You didn't overnight me a book. See, that's why.
It's okay, I guess. Whatever, Mike. No big deal. But Rory, because I know you haven't seen the book in person, on the back of the book, I love this so much. You have something that says problem and then solution, which I think is so cool. So for anyone that's just kind of quickly scanning, problem: Forbes states 50% of businesses don't make it 5 years. 70% don't make it 10 years. Solution: know what to do before you have to do it. And that really, your book is very, it's just so encouraging. And I love all the personal aspects that you include. It's just like socks on a rooster,
Yes, there you go.
Let's talk a little bit about the power of podcasting for a minute.
Yes.
If you don't mind. All right. So you mentioned that you've actually been podcasting for like a really long time. We're talking like over a decade or so, right?
Yeah. On and off. I knew when I was teaching, it was kind of in its infancy, but it was coming out. And I was like, well, this is a cool way just to do test reviews with my students, put out lessons that students can listen to. That I know we talked about movies a little bit earlier, but like I showed a lot of movies when I taught. I taught ethics and Bible. So the best way to kind of teach that content, I felt, was through movies. So I would show movies like Iron Man and Spider-Man and Shawshank Redemption, just all these movies, and then try to relate it to the content. Like I used to show Elf this time of year. We did the stages of adolescent development. So I would show the movie Elf because he literally goes from like childhood to adulthood in the movie. So by doing that and using podcasting in the classroom, it freed me up to be able to do more things with my students. And the same is true now of my podcast now, the Start Down, which is, we focus on, wait, hold on. merchandising, where the real money in the movies is made. So, the start down, I was doing Facebook Lives, and then I turned it into a podcast. And the idea behind it is that, startup is a great idea, but the start down is where we get to work, right? Like that's where it happens. Like all these ideas are out there. And like I said, that entrepreneurial gateway is really very wide open, but the pathway to success is very narrow. So we've had Dominica on, Rory, I'd love to have you on, but it's people that have really gone down that path and can tell that story, because I really truly believe that there is no one path to success. There really is no one recipe. I go back, I know I talk a lot about being Italian, but at the end of the day, I make my sauce a certain way on Sunday. My mom makes it a different way. My grandmother, God rest her soul, used to make it another way. My mother-in-law makes it another way. Even my wife, we cook in the same house with the same pots and the same ingredients, but our sauces taste different, right? But it's still good, right? You still get fed, you still get nourishment. So I think there's so many different paths you could go. Just don't use jarred sauce or go to the Olive Garden. Those are the two ways to fail. I think at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is the same thing. So I really use the podcast in that vein. I will say during COVID, I really missed going to live events and networking with people. It turned into a great way to network. I mean, I was able to have so many great people on the show. I was able to meet people and have conversations, engage. And much like the book, it's been another way to kind of break the ice, right? It's been another way for me to just kind of, talk to people and get to know them before I get to know them, if you will. And then more importantly, I like it because I feel like it's a little bit of a time capsule as well. It goes back and it tells the story of where I've gone and what I've done, both selfishly, a little bit for me, but then I think also in the business for my kids, like I said, very similar to the book. I think it's important to be out there and sharing that story. And I just feel like when I was growing up, there was nowhere for me to go like that. So that's the other reason why I really like to do the podcast. So it's a little bit personal, a little bit professional. I've been able to meet so many great entrepreneurs. I've had some celebrities on. So it's just been a really, really cool thing to be able to do, as you guys know.
It's a cool world. Well, this has been amazing. I wish that we could just talk forever, but can you tell the listeners, I know you have a very generous offer, a gift for our listeners. Can you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we are giving away a Lamborghini. No. Oh, wait, wrong show. Sorry. That's the Mr. Beast show. The book, like Socks on a Rooster. Like I said, I'm so excited this has come out. I really believe that there's so much good stuff in there. Dominica, I appreciate you saying all the nice things about it. My website, if you go to MikeFicara.com, you'll see a link there to buy the book in our store. And if you enter in a promo code, and I just want to make sure I get the promo code right, big picture. So you're going to enter in the promo code big picture. You're going to get 50% off the book. So I think the book's $19.99 in there. That means you get it for $9.99. If you order it on the website, I'll also make sure, and I see you order with the promo code, I'll make sure I autographed it for you as well, which that may be worth money, whether or not I do something really good or really bad someday. So that's going to be really neat to have. Once again, just to your audience, thank you guys for taking the time to listen to this podcast and beyond. I'd be more than happy to do that. So Mike Ficara, it's just my name, MikeFicara.com, which if you don't own your name as a domain, you should do that. There's another little pro tip there. And then right there on the website, the book's for sale, and enter in the promo code big picture and you are going to get 50% off.
It'll be as valuable as those baseballs behind you.
Yes. I'm a big Yankees fan. And the basketball coach saw A-Rod at a basketball game they were playing down here and got A-Rod to sign the baseball. And then we had a conversation about one of his students that really needed some help. So I would say I got the baseball for free, but I ended up needing to tutor the kid as well. So no free lunches, kids.
I didn't know that you were a Yankees fan. My great uncle is Lou Gehrig.
No way. That is awesome. That is really cool. Oh man, small world.
Anyways, Mike, so nice always to chat with you. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. That is it for this week, you guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.